Hello, guys. This is Jack, and today I'm going to be reviewing September 5, or should I say September 5th, because that's the better title. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about this film, not extensively because I don't want to spoil it since it's already a history lesson that you probably already know. And if you don't know the history behind the story, I suggest going on Wikipedia and taking a look at it. And also check out the film Munich by Steven Spielberg. I think that film goes super deep into the 1972 Munich Olympics hostage situation that happened around that time. But yeah, let's get into September 5. So September 5 is a movie about the 1972 Munich Olympics hostage situation that happened with one of the Israeli athletes competing at the Munich Games in 1972. This film takes a perspective on the newscasters who covered the story when it happened live, instead of, showing the other side of the field in terms of like the hostages, the people around the hostages who were trying to convince the terrorists to take the hostages out of a situation. That doesn't go over there. Instead, it's more focused on the newscasters, as this whole film is centered on a bottle area where you're just inside of the newsroom and you have a bunch of these characters who are newscasters, studio heads, editors, videographers, people who work in the newsroom who are trying to get the story out. Two of the main characters are played by Peter Sarsgaard and John Magaro. These two characters are butting heads, trying to convince themselves that the story is much bigger than it is outside. Especially John Magaro's character, who is tasked to be the director of the newscast of the live terrorist event that's happening outside of their walls. And John Magaro is making every single move really meticulously and trying to convince the other side that his style of directing the newscast is much better than, the older heads who have done this for years, covering multiple live events. And of course, this live event that happened caused what should I say? I don't know how to explain it, but it's a spectacle. That's what I should say, actually. So much so that this ABC live report of the situation was probably one of the biggest televised events in American history. And you, again, get to see a lot of these characters try to put everything together in real time. And it's a 90-minute, easy breezy movie. And that's just literally the basis of the movie, is you're just following these characters as they go around the newsroom trying to figure out the angle of the story that's happening live. Now, I'm going to start with the positives real quick before, I get into the negatives. The positives are the acting performances from both Peter Sarsgaard and John Magaro are really good, despite some of their characters just being one-noted. And when I say that is because you only get to experience the inside of the newsroom. You don't get to experience the outside of the situation. You don't get to see, both of these characters deal with their family or any of their backstories. Instead, it's just completely focused inside of the newsroom, and that's the only emotional tension that you're going to get. But I think Peter Sarsgaard and John Magaro play these types of characters right, even though some of their morals is kind of questionable, because you're dealing with a story that is literally sensationalism at its core and a fetishization of the media's attention to, a spectacle. That will start with the negative side of the movie, but I'm not going to go deep into that just yet. But I do think also the other performances in this are just fine. They're not, something that I can write home about. It's just they're just serviceable. They're just here to play with their caricature characters. There's one character who's just angry at Muslims. There's another character who's German, who's only the translator in the situation. She doesn't have any agency. She's just there to translate what's going on in German. And then just the rest of the characters are just there to carry bags and go out of the field, but you don't see them completely go out of the field. You just see live footage of them inside of the newsroom out onto the field, instead of focusing on that perspective. But yeah, I think the performances are just serviceable and fine. It's nothing really monumental to write home about in terms of Oscar potential. But I do think John Magaro is the best character actor working today, and just the best character in this film, because even though you don't understand some of the motives that he takes throughout the entire film, you still also still understand that like each movie he does make will change just the perspective of the story. And yeah, like I think that's the only thing you can pretty much grab from John Magara's performance, is just like that like internal struggle with getting the news story correct and right and real. Now that I've kind of, set the stage of some of the negatives that I have with this film, I want to go a little bit deeper into it, like cut a little bit deep into it, because I do think the film itself try to portray this, historical event in like a bottle situation with just showing like these characters in one room. It works fine for like its 90-minute like runtime. But then once you start to like really go deep into the psyche of the story, it starts to fall apart once you realize that there's no other perspective to see aside from like the newscasters in the story. Instead, you don't see any of the hostages. There is one section where one of the hostages who escaped from the situation comes to the newsroom to interview one of the main newscasters, and I think that perspective was only just there. Other than that, the rest of the movie, you're just following these newscasters, and there's nothing else to really, grab onto. You don't see any of like the Palestinians, you don't see any of the other fieldcasters who go outside of the newsroom and report on the field. Instead, again, it's just in the newsroom. And I think once you get past like the 50-minute mark, it starts to wane with like the narrative. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was kind of like taken aback by a lot of the stuff that was happening, was because there's nothing else to like completely grab onto aside from like just the inside of the situation. You're not seeing the outside perspective. The other thing that I think needs to be addressed is some of the aspects of this film being about like media sensationalism, and to pin that down is that the fact that our society is really into, sensationalism, spectacle, stuff that you see on the news and just like in general on social media. You just love to see violence and stuff like that. This film doesn't go super deep into like the psyches of how these types of violence work on the other side of the like field. And this is kind of like vaguely talking about like the Palestinians who suffered through a lot of the stuff that happened during the hostage situation, not like the actual terrorists, but like the entire Palestinian people. And this also reflects to today with the Palestinian-Israeli war that's happening right now, which is terrible. And I condemn, I should say, both the actions of, Israel and Palestine. But I think once you have like that like modern perspective in your brain, and then you think about the past with like the Munich hostage situation, then it starts to kind of like fall apart. And then you want to kind of like think about the motive of like this entire film. Like, what's the point of it? It's just to show that like these newscasters brought their A game to the live situation. But also in reality, that's the only thing they had, aside from not actually like going out of their way to, report on like the Palestinians and how they were dealing with their, grievances with this situation. And yeah, this also again reflects with today, where you see like these images of the Palestinian people getting slaughtered and murdered and killed, and you don't hear their side of the story, but like the mainstream media loves to, talk about the other side of the situation with like the Israelis, how they're dealing with it. And again, once you like really like think about like that in your mind, the film, it starts to fall apart. And I do think, again, this film is just, it's pure Oscar bait. Oscar bait to its core, and I wasn't surprised that this got nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Picture in the drama category, and the adapted screenplay nomination. It's not going to go super far out past that, because it seems like the BAFTA long list snubbed it, so that's good. But I think at the end of the day, this film it doesn't offer any other perspective of the situation. And this also kind of like reminded me back to Munich, the film by Steven Spielberg, which was very broad and expressive with like the both perspectives of the situation while also the aftermath of the situation. I recommend that movie more than this movie, where it's just like, oh, it's just one, long bottle episode of this dramatic event that happened, and that's it. So I think that's the reason why I gave it a 2.5 out of 5, was because I didn't grab anything else from it aside from just like, oh, this is just a spectacle. Like, that's it. So yeah, I give this a 2.5 out of 5. That's basically it. I do think the performances are decent. John Magaro and Peter Sarsgaard both deliver good performances, but that's basically it. And they're just playing caricatures of the main real people. But yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say. I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's more of a movie you just watch at home and go like, oh yeah, I remember that happened, and then that was it. But if you do watch it, I think it's probably because, you know, you're following the Oscars and you're trying to like see if this might like sneak into any of the top line categories. I don't see it, but I wouldn't be surprised because of some of the warm reception that this is getting from a lot of journalists who work on the field during like the Oscar season. It is a love letter to the journalists, but I think that's basically what you get here, and that's it. But yeah, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Just a small quickie. I will be talking about the Oscar nominations pretty soon. I'll do my final predictions, and I might also do SAG and Critics' Choice, so stick around for that. And yeah, peace out.